They say love is blind, but in the high-stakes world of New York's elite, love is just a transaction. Gray Blackwood, a tech mogul worth millions, thought he held all the cards. He thought his wife Hera was nothing more than a penniless orphan he could discard like yesterday's trash. He humiliated her. He broke her. And finally, in front of 300 distinguished guests, he threw her out into the cold rain. But Gray made a fatal calculation. He didn't know who Hera really was. He didn't know that standing behind that orphan was a shadow larger than his entire empire. Today, the courtroom doors are about to open, and the man who thought he was a king is about to learn a brutal lesson in humility. Stick around, because the karma coming for Gray Blackwood isn't just hard, it's lethal. The air inside the Manhattan Superior Courtroom 402 was so thick with tension it felt like it could be cut with a knife. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow on the polished mahogany tables. Outside, a thunderstorm was battering the city rain, lashing against the high windows, but inside the storm was entirely man-made. On the plaintiff's side sat Gray Blackwood. At 34 years old, Gray was the picture of modern corporate arrogance. Wearing a bespoke charcoal Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars, he sat with a relaxed slouch, tapping a gold fountain pen against the legal pad in front of him. He was the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a rising star in the tech world, and his face was often plastered on the covers of Forbes and GQ. He looked at the jury not with respect, but with a charming practiced smile that said, "I shouldn't even be here." On the defendant's side sat Hera. She looked nothing like the woman who had graced the society pages on Gray's arm just a year ago. She wore a simple, inexpensive gray blouse and black slacks. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore no jewelry, specifically no wedding ring. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring straight ahead at the empty witness stand. She looked small, fragile, and entirely out of her depth. "All rise!" The bailiff bellowed, his voice booming off the wood-paneled walls. The Honorable Judge Thomas Allister swept into the room. Judge Allister was a man known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding courtroom theatrics. He was nearing 70 with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie New York City had to offer. He took his seat, arranged his robes, and peered over his spectacles. "Be seated," Judge Allister said, his voice gravelly. "We are here for the matter of Blackwood versus Blackwood. The plaintiff, Mr. Gray Blackwood, is filing for an annulment based on fraud and is seeking damages for defamation of character. The defendant, Mrs. Hera Blackwood, is countersuing for wrongful termination of marital assets and emotional distress." The judge looked at Gray's lawyer, a shark of a man named Jonathan Pierce. Pierce was known as the Butcher of Wall Street. He didn't just win cases, he destroyed lives. "Mr. Pierce," the judge nodded, "you may proceed with your opening statement." Pierce stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with every juror. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pierce began, his voice smooth as silk, "this is a simple case of a predator and prey, but not in the way you might think. My client, Mr. Blackwood, is a self-made man. He built an empire from a garage in Brooklyn. He fell in love with the defendant, a woman who claimed to be a struggling waitress with no family, no connections, and no money. He took her in. He gave her a life of luxury. And how did she repay him? By embarrassing him, by refusing to adapt to his world. And finally, when he tried to amicably end the marriage, she went to the press and spread vicious lies to tarnish his company's stock value. We are here today to prove that Hera Blackwood is a fraud, a gold digger who failed at her one job, being a supportive wife." Gray smirked from his table. He leaned over to his junior associate and whispered loud enough for Hera to hear, "She'll be lucky if she can afford a bus ticket out of town when I'm done with her." Hera didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes forward, waiting. The first witness called to the stand by the prosecution was meant to be the nail in Hera's coffin. It was Mrs. Beatrice Calloway, a high society socialite, and the wife of a banking tycoon. She was dressed in pearls and tweed, clutching a designer handbag as if the air in the courtroom might contaminate it. "Mrs. Calloway," Pierce said, pacing in front of the stand, Were you present at the Blackwood Charity Gala on the night of October 14th? I was Mrs. Calloway said, sniffing disdainfully. It was the event of the season. Everyone was there, the senator, the board of directors. It was supposed to be a sophisticated evening. And can you describe the behavior of the defendant Hera Blackwood that evening? Mrs. Calloway turned her nose up, glancing at Hera with pure disgust. It was appalling. Gray Mr. Blackwood was trying to close a very important deal with a Japanese delegation. Hera was sitting there looking completely out of place. She was wearing a dress that looked well off the rack. When the delegation asked her a question about the wine, she stuttered. She didn't know the difference between a Pinot and a Merlot. It was humiliating for Gray. You could see the shame on his face. Hera's lawyer, a young, sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, scribbled furiously on her notepad, but didn't object. And what happened next? Pierce pressed, enjoying the narrative. She spilled it, Mrs. Calloway said dramatically. She reached for the salt, which nobody does at a 5-course dinner, and knocked a glass of red wine right onto the white tablecloth, splashing the Japanese investor's wife. The room went silent. It was the clumsy act of a peasant. Pierce nodded gravely. And how did Mr. Blackwood react? He did what any strong leader would do, Mrs. Calloway said. He took control. He apologized to the guests and told Hera to leave. He told her to go home because she was ruining the most important night of his career. Pierce turned to the jury. He asked her to leave, but did she go quietly? No. Mrs. Calloway shook her head. She started crying, begging. Gray, please, it was an accident. It was pathetic. She caused a scene. Finally, Gray had to physically escort her to the doors. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. Pierce sat down looking satisfied. Sarah Jenkins, Hera's lawyer, stood up. She didn't look intimidated by the wealthy socialite. Mrs. Calloway, Sarah began. You said Gray escorted her. Did he have a hand on her arm? Yes. Was he gripping her tightly? He was firm. He had to be. Did he open the door for her? Mrs. Calloway hesitated. He opened the main doors, yes. And what was the weather like that night, Mrs. Calloway? It was raining, quite hard. Did Mr. Blackwood give his wife a coat? I don't recall. Did he call her a car? He told the valets to stand down. Mrs. Calloway admitted, her voice dropping slightly. He said she could walk to cool off. A murmur went through the courtroom. Sarah Jenkins let the silence hang there. So, Sarah said, her voice rising, to be clear, Mr. Blackwood threw his wife out of a gala in a dress you described as thin into a freezing rainstorm without a coat and ordered the valets not to help her. Is that correct? She ruined the dinner, Mrs. Calloway snapped. She deserved to be taught a lesson. No further questions. As Mrs. Calloway stepped down, Gray looked annoyed. He leaned over to Pierce. Why did you let her say that about the valet? Fix this. Relax, Pierce whispered. We're establishing that you're a man of standards, and she was incompetent. The jury won't care about a little rain when we reveal the financial fraud. The trial moved into the afternoon. The rain outside was hitting the windows harder now, mirroring the storm brewing inside. Pierce called his next witness. I call Jessica Vance to the stand. The doors opened and a woman walked in who was the polar opposite of Hera. Jessica Vance was tall, blonde, and undeniably stunning. She wore a red dress that was borderline inappropriate for court, but she wore it with confidence. She was Gray's executive assistant. As she walked past the defense table, she shot Hera a smirk, a look of pure predatory victory. Hera looked down at her hands, her knuckles turning white. Ms. Vance, Pierce smiled. Please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Blackwood. I have been Gray's executive assistant for 3 years, Jessica said, her voice sultry. I handle his schedule, his travel, and his personal matters when his wife is unable to. And were you aware of the financial arrangement between Mr. Blackwood and the defendant? Yes, Jessica said. Gray was very generous. He didn't want a prenup. He trusted her. But about 6 months ago we found discrepancies in the household accounts. Money moving to offshore accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger. Pierce held up a document. Is this the report you found? Yes. Hera was funneling money. We believe she was planning to leave him and take a payout. That's why Gray was so on edge the night of the gala. He knew she was stealing from him. The jury gasped. Financial theft changed the narrative. Suddenly Gray wasn't just a cruel husband. He was a victim of a con artist. Sarah Jenkins stood up for cross-examination. Ms. Vance, Sarah said calmly, you say you handle Mr. Blackwood's personal matters. Does that include sharing his hotel room on business trips to Dubai, Paris, and Rome? Objection, Pierce shouted. Relevance. It goes to credibility and bias, Your Honor, Sarah argued. If the witness is romantically involved with the plaintiff, her testimony regarding the wife is suspect. Overruled, Judge Allister said. Answer the question. Jessica stiffened. Gray and I have a close professional relationship. We travel together, yes. And did you on the night of the gala tell Hera in the restroom that she should enjoy the champagne because it would be her last glass? Jessica's eyes widened. I never said that. We have a bathroom attendant who is willing to testify otherwise, Sarah bluffed. It was a gamble, but it worked. Jessica flustered. I might have said something about her tenure being up. She was bad for the company image. Look at her, she's a mouse. Gray needed a lioness. He needed someone who understands power. So you admit you wanted her gone? Everyone wanted her gone, Jessica shouted, losing her cool. Gray hated coming home to her. He told me she was just a placeholder until the stock IPO went public. He threw her out because he was finally done pretending. The courtroom buzzed. Jessica had just admitted Gray's cruelty was premeditated. Gray face-palmed, rubbing his temples. This was getting messy. He stood up, disregarding protocol. Enough of this, Gray bellowed, silencing the room. The point is, she is a nobody. She came from the gutter, and I tried to polish her up, but dirt is dirt. I threw her out because she didn't belong in my world, and now I want her to pay for dragging my name through the mud. Judge Allister slammed his gavel. Mr. Blackwood, sit down, or I will hold you in contempt. Gray sat straightening his tie, his face red with rage. Just finish this, he hissed to Pierce. Pierce looked at the judge. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. Judge Allister turned to Sarah Jenkins. Does the defense have any witnesses? Sarah Jenkins stood up slowly. She didn't look at the jury. She looked at Gray. A small, cold smile played on her lips. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls only one witness. She paused for effect. We call Mr. Arthur Sterling. At the mention of the name, the air in the room changed. Several jurors straightened up. Even the judge blinked in surprise. Arthur Sterling, Gray whispered, confused. The CEO of Sterling Global, the billionaire who owns half the real estate in Manhattan. Why the hell is he a witness for her? Pierce looked pale. I don't know, Gray. Maybe she used to scrub his floors, Gray sneered, trying to regain his composure. Maybe she's his charity case. We call Arthur Sterling to the stand, Sarah repeated. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The double doors of the courtroom didn't just open. They were held open by two men in dark suits who looked more like Secret Service agents than private security. Arthur Sterling walked in. At 78, the man was a living legend in the financial world. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, leaning on a cane topped with a silver wolf's head. But there was no frailty in him. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He wore a three-piece navy suit that was tailored to perfection, and his white hair was swept back, revealing a face carved from granite. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even Judge Alastair sat up straighter, adjusting his glasses. The court reporter stopped typing for a split second, awestruck. Gray Blackwood stared, his mouth slightly agape. He leaned toward his lawyer, Pierce. What is he doing here? Did she used to work for him? Is that it? She was his maid. Pierce was sweating now. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Shut up, Gray. Just shut up. Arthur Sterling walked past the defense table. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the judge. He stopped in front of Hera. For the first time since the trial began, Hera looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but when she looked at the old man, a soft, sad smile touched her lips. Arthur placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of immense protectiveness. He whispered something to her that no one else heard, then turned and marched to the witness stand. State your name for the record, the bailiff said, his voice trembling slightly. Arthur James Sterling, the billionaire said. His voice was deep, resonant like a cello. Chairman of Sterling Global Industries. Sarah Jenkins, Hera's lawyer, approached the stand. She looked confident, her posture mirroring the power of her witness. Mr. Sterling, Sarah began. Thank you for coming. I know you are a private man. Can you please explain to the court your relationship to the defendant, Hera Blackwood? Arthur's steel blue eyes shifted to Gray. The look was so cold, so filled with disdain that Gray actually flinched. Hera is not Hera Blackwood to me, Arthur said slowly. Nor is she Hera Vance, the name she used when she moved to the city to escape the paparazzi. He paused, letting the suspense build. She is Hera Sterling, my granddaughter, and the sole heiress to the Sterling family fortune. A collective gasp ripped through the courtroom. It was louder than the thunder outside. The jury members looked at each other, eyes wide. The stenographer's jaw dropped. Objection! Pierce shot up, knocking his chair back. This is preposterous. We have her birth certificate. Her parents were nobodies from Ohio. Sit down, Mr. Pierce, Judge Alastair barked. Mr. Sterling, please clarify. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. My son Hera's father died when she was young. To protect her from kidnappers and fortune hunters, we sealed her records. She wanted to live a normal life. She wanted to find a man who loved her for her, not for the billions she will inherit. She wanted to be sure. Arthur turned his gaze back to Gray. So, she became a waitress. She lived in a small apartment. And then she met you, Mr. Blackwood. She told me she had found a diamond in the rough, a man who loved her even though she had nothing. Arthur's laugh was dry and humorless. But it turns out you didn't love her because she had nothing. You loved her because you thought she was weak. You thought she was someone you could control. Gray was shaking his head, his face pale. No, that's a lie. She's lying. She's a fraud. She deceived me. Deception. Arthur's voice rose thundering through the room. You speak of deception. You who cheated on her with your secretary while spending her money. I never spent her money, Gray screamed. She was broke. I paid for everything. Arthur leaned into the microphone. Are you sure about that, boy? Sarah Jenkins walked back to her table and picked up a thick stack of financial documents. She handed them to the bailiff to distribute to the jury and the plaintiff. Exhibit C, Sarah announced. Mr. Sterling, can you explain what these documents are? Arthur put on a pair of reading glasses. These are the transaction records for Blackwood Dynamics over the last 2 years. Specifically, the capital injections that saved the company from bankruptcy 18 months ago. Gray froze. 18 months ago, his company had hit a wall. He had been desperate. Then, miraculously, an anonymous angel investor had stepped in through a shell company called Aurora Holdings, pumping in $20 million. I see you remember, Arthur said, watching Gray's face. You thought Aurora Holdings was some offshore group interested in your tech. It wasn't. Arthur pointed a finger at Hera. It was her. The courtroom erupted again. Judge Alastair banged the gavel furiously. Order in this court. When the noise died down, Arthur continued, his voice slicing through the silence. Hera saw you were struggling. She saw you were stressed. She came to me and asked for her trust fund early. She wanted to save her husband's dream. She funneled $20 million into your company anonymously because she knew your ego was too fragile to accept money from your wife. Gray looked at the documents in his hands. The signature on the bottom of the transfer order was undeniable. Hera M. Sterling. She saved you, Arthur said, his voice dripping with disgust. She saved your company. She saved your reputation. And how did you repay her? You mocked her education. You belittled her style. You cheated on her. And then, Arthur's eyes darkened. Then came the gala. The gala was a disaster, Pierce interjected, trying to salvage the sinking ship. She insulted the Japanese delegation. She ruined the deal. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying sight. Mr. Pierce, do you know who the head of that Japanese delegation was? Mr. Kenji Sato? Yes, of course, Pierce stammered. Kenji Sato is my godson, Arthur said calmly. I asked him to attend that gala to evaluate Gray. I wanted to see if he was finally worthy of knowing Hera's true identity. Arthur leaned back. Kenji called me 10 minutes after he left. He didn't leave because Hera spilled wine. He left because he watched a husband berate his wife in public. He watched you. Gray grab her arm. He watched you throw her out into the rain. In Japanese culture, honor is everything. You showed you have none. Kenji told me, Uncle, this man is trash. Get Hera out of there. Gray sank into his chair. He looked small. The arrogant billionaire posture was gone, replaced by the slump of a defeated child. So, Sarah Jenkins said, driving the point home, the fraud Gray accused her of, the money moving to offshore accounts. What was that Arthur said, was Hera trying to move her remaining assets out of your reach once she realized you were having an affair with Ms. Vance. It wasn't your money she was moving, Gray. It was hers. And frankly, compared to the sterling fortune, the pennies in your joint account were irrelevant. The atmosphere in Superior Courtroom 402 had shifted from a domestic dispute to something far more lethal. It was no longer a divorce trial. It was an autopsy of Gray Blackwood's arrogance. The revelation that Hera was a Sterling, the sole heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the Western Hemisphere, had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Gray sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles had turned a skeletal white. Beside him, his lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, was frantically shuffling through papers, his Butcher of Wall Street persona dissolving into panic. He whispered furiously to Gray, "Did you know? How could you not know? You've been married to her for 2 years, Gray. How do you miss a $10 billion trust fund?" "I didn't know," Gray hissed back, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. "She told me she was from Ohio. She told me her parents died in a car crash." "They did!" Arthur Sterling's voice boomed from the witness stand, cutting through their hushed argument like a broadsword. "And when they died, I promised to protect her from parasites. It seems I let one slip through the cracks." Judge Alastair banged his gavel, though he seemed more captivated than annoyed. "Mr. Sterling, please refrain from addressing the plaintiff directly. Miss Jenkins, proceed with your evidence." Sarah Jenkins? Hera's attorney walked to the center of the room. She didn't look like a divorce lawyer anymore. She looked like an executioner. She signaled to the bailiff, who wheeled in a cart stacked with heavy leather-bound binders. "Your Honor." Sarah began, her voice dangerously calm. "The plaintiff, Mr. Blackwood, has spent this entire trial painting my client as a financial burden. He claims she was a drain on his resources. He claims he wants an annulment to protect his company Blackwood Dynamics from her incompetence." She picked up a thick document from the cart. It was bound in blue legal stock. "We have already established that the $20 million injection that saved his company 18 months ago came from Aurora Holdings, a shell company owned by Mrs. Sterling. But what Mr. Blackwood seems to have forgotten, or perhaps what he was too arrogant to read, are the terms attached to that capital." Sarah turned to Gray. She held the document up. Mr. Blackwood, do you recognize this? This is the sovereign debt agreement you signed with Aurora Holdings. Gray squinted at it. I signed 100 contracts that year. We were expanding. It was standard boilerplate. Standard? Sarah raised an eyebrow. She walked over to the witness stand and handed the document to Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling, as the executor of the trust that manages Aurora Holdings, could you please read Clause 14, Section B regarding the goodwill and morality covenants? Arthur adjusted his glasses. He looked at Gray with the pity one might show a rabid dog before putting it down. Clause 14, Section B. Arthur read, his deep voice resonating off the walls. The borrower, Mr. Gray Blackwood, acknowledges that the lender Aurora Holdings maintains a reputation of high ethical standing. Consequently, should the borrower engage in any public conduct that brings disrepute, shame, or scandal to the lender, or should the borrower display gross negligence in the management of his personal or professional affairs that reflects poorly on the investment. Arthur paused, his eyes locking onto Gray. Then the lender reserves the right to classify the loan as in default immediately. Upon default, the full principal sum of $20 million plus accrued interest becomes due and payable within 60 minutes of notification. The silence that followed was absolute. Gray laughed nervously. It was a dry cracking sound. Disrepute scandal. That's subjective. You can't enforce that. I haven't done anything illegal. I just filed for divorce. It is not about the divorce, Gray, Arthur said, closing the folder. It is about the gala. Sarah Jenkins stepped in. You humiliated your wife in front of the city's elite. You physically removed her from the premises into a storm. You allowed your staff to mock her. And as we have established through Ms. Vance's testimony, you were conducting an illicit affair with your secretary while representing the company. Sarah turned to the jury. But here is the kicker. Since Hera is the owner of Aurora Holdings, when you humiliated her, you were humiliating the lender. You were publicly shaming the very hand that fed you. This is ridiculous. Pierce stood up, sweat visible on his forehead. This is a reach, Your Honor. A morality clause is usually reserved for celebrity endorsements, not corporate loans. You can't call in a $20 million debt because of a bad dinner party. Actually, Arthur interrupted smoothly, we can, and we have. Arthur pulled a slim black smartphone from his suit pocket. He tapped the screen twice. At 1:15 p.m. today, exactly 20 minutes ago, my legal team in Zurich formally filed the notice of default. It was delivered electronically to your chief financial officer. Gray scrambled for his own phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it on the table before fumbling to pick it up. He dialed his CFO. Pick up, you idiot, Gray muttered, panic rising in his chest like bile. The call connected. Gray! The voice on the other end sounded terrified. Gray, what is going on? The bank just locked us out. I can't access the payroll accounts. I'm getting alerts from the SEC. They say the liquidity has been pulled. What do you mean locked out? Gray screamed, forgetting he was in a courtroom. Override it. Call the bank. I can't. The CFO yelled back, his voice tinny through the speaker. The wire recall is absolute. Gray, the notification says we owe $20 million today. We don't have that in cash. All our capital is tied up in the new server farm in Jersey. If we don't pay, they trigger the collateral clause. Gray lowered the phone slowly. His face was the color of ash. The collateral, Sarah Jenkins said softly, stepping closer to him. Let's talk about that. Usually a loan of this size is secured by assets, buildings, patents, intellectual property. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. But your company didn't have enough assets 18 months ago. You were already leveraged to the hilt. So you put up the only thing you had left to give. Sarah projected an image onto the courtroom screen. It was the signature page of the loan agreement. Highlighted in neon yellow was the collateral section. Collateral pledge, 51% of voting Class A shares of Blackwood Dynamics. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. "You pledged your majority stake," Sarah said. "If you default, Aurora Holdings Hera doesn't just get her money back. She absorbs your shares to cover the debt." "No," Gray whispered. He looked at Pierce. "Do something, object. They can't just take my company." Pierce sank into his chair, defeated. "They can, Gray. You signed it. It's a secured transaction. If you can't pay the cash, the equity transfers automatically. It's ironclad." Arthur Sterling leaned into the microphone. "And since you clearly do not have $20 million in your pocket, Mr. Blackwood, the transfer has already been initiated." Arthur looked at his watch. "In fact, as of 3 minutes ago, the transfer is complete. Hera Sterling is now the majority shareholder of Blackwood Dynamics." The devastation was total. Gray Blackwood wasn't just losing a lawsuit, he was undergoing an identity death. His entire self-worth was tied to that CEO title. Without it, he was just a man in a suit he could no longer afford. But Arthur wasn't done. He signaled to the back of the courtroom. "And since the majority shareholder is concerned about the current direction of management—" The doors opened again. A short, stout man with a briefcase walked in. He was the general counsel for Blackwood Dynamics, Gray's own company lawyer. But he wouldn't look Gray in the eye. He walked straight to the defense table and handed a document to Hera. Hera took the document. She stood up. It was the first time she had really moved since the revelation. She smoothed her skirt and looked at Gray. Her eyes were dry. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Gray," Hera said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent courtroom it carried like a bell. Gray looked up, tears of rage and impotence streaming down his face. "Hera, don't do this. I built that company. It's me. You can't separate us." "You separated us the night you chose your reputation over your wife," Hera replied. "You separated us every time you came home smelling like her perfume." She gestured vaguely toward Jessica Vance. Jessica, realizing the ship was sinking, had already physically scooted her chair away from Gray. She was furiously deleting photos from her Instagram, trying to scrub her association with the disgraced CEO in real time. Hera opened the folder the general counsel had given her. "As the majority shareholder," Hera announced, "I am calling an emergency vote of the board. Since I hold 51% of the vote, I don't need the others." She looked at the paper, then back at him. "Motion to remove Gray Blackwood as Chief Executive Officer for cause specifically gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." "Hera, please," Gray begged, standing up, his hands reaching out across the aisle. "I'm sorry, I'll sign the annulment. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't take my company." "Motion carries," Hera said, her voice unwavering. "Motion to strip Gray Blackwood of all executive privileges, corporate housing, and company transport effective immediately." Hera. "Motion carries." "Motion to bar Gray Blackwood from entering company premises pending a forensic audit of his expense accounts regarding funds used for Ms. Jessica Vance." Jessica Vance let out a small squeak of terror. "Motion carries," Hera finished. She snapped the folder shut. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the defense asserts that the plaintiff, Mr. Blackwood, no longer has the standing to sue for defamation of character regarding his professional reputation, as he has been terminated for cause by his own board of directors." Judge Alastair looked at Gray. The man was broken. He was hyperventilating, pulling at his tie as if it were a noose. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, "your client appears to be in distress. Do you wish to request a recess?" "I wish to request to withdraw as counsel," Pierce said abruptly, standing up and gathering his briefcase. "What?" Gray grabbed Pierce's arm. "You can't leave me. You have to fix this." Pierce ripped his arm away, looking at Gray with undisguised contempt. "My retainer is billed to Blackwood Dynamics, Gray. And seeing as you are no longer the CEO and the new owner," he nodded respectfully toward Hera, "is unlikely to authorize my invoices to defend you against her. I'm not getting paid. And I don't work for free. Pierce looked at the judge. Mr. Blackwood is indigent, Your Honor. I am withdrawing. Pierce walked out. Gray stood alone. The king of tech was surrounded by enemies. On one side, the wife he betrayed now holding the keys to his kingdom. On the other, the mistress he flaunted who was currently texting a frantic apology to Hera's lawyer in hopes of avoiding a lawsuit. And above him, the billionaire grandfather looking down like an Old Testament god who had just flooded the earth. Arthur Sterling leaned forward one last time. You know Gray. The old man said, his voice conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. Hera wanted to just leave. She wanted to sign the papers, take her small savings, and disappear. She didn't want your money. She didn't want your company. She just wanted out. Arthur pointed his cane at Gray's chest. But you had to drag her into court. You had to try to destroy her name to boost your stock price. You poked the bear, son. And now you don't just lose the girl. You lose the world. Arthur sat back, looking satisfied. We are done here. Gray sank into his chair, putting his head in his hands. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. The penthouse was company property. The car was a lease. The credit cards were corporate. Even the phone in his hand was an asset of Blackwood Dynamics. He was homeless. He was broke. And he was entirely alone. Hera watched him crumble. She didn't smile. There was no joy in this. Only the heavy, grim satisfaction of a balance sheet finally being corrected. She turned to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, Hera whispered. Hera, finish it. Sarah Jenkins turned to the judge. Your Honor, since the plaintiff has no assets, no counsel, and no job, we move for immediate summary judgment. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the gavel to fall on the life of Gray Blackwood. The silence in Superior Courtroom 402 was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that sounded like a countdown. Gray Blackwood sat alone at the defense table. The space beside him, where his high-priced lawyer Jonathan Pierce had sat just moments ago, was empty. The chair was pushed back, a physical void representing the abandonment Gray was now experiencing. Judge Alastair did not look at the paperwork in front of him. He looked directly at Gray. The judge's face was unreadable, a mask of judicial neutrality that had slipped just enough to reveal deep personal disdain. He removed his spectacles, slowly folding them and placing them on the bench. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Alastair said, his voice gravelly and echoing in the high-ceilinged room. In my 30 years on the bench, I have presided over murders, racketeering cases, and billion-dollar frauds. Yet rarely have I seen a case that wasted the court's time with such malignant arrogance as this one. Gray opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, but his throat was so dry it clicked shut. You came here seeking an annulment based on fraud. The judge continued, his volume rising slightly. You claimed your wife deceived you. The only deception found in this courtroom, sir, is the one you practiced on yourself. You deceived yourself into believing that money buys character. You deceived yourself into believing that loyalty is a commodity. And you deceived yourself into thinking you were untouchable. The judge picked up his gavel. The wood felt heavy in his hand. In light of the evidence presented, specifically the admission of adultery, the proof of gross financial mismanagement, and the confirmed seizure of your assets by the primary lien holder, this court finds your petition to be frivolous, malicious, and entirely without merit. The stenographer's keys clattered like gunfire. I am dismissing your suit with prejudice, Judge Alastair announced. Furthermore, regarding the defendant's countersuit for emotional distress and wrongful termination of marital assets. The judge glanced at Hera. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. I am finding in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Hera Sterling. Mr. Blackwood, you are hereby ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees totaling $158,000, as well as punitive damages in the amount of $50,000 for the public defamation occurring at the gala. Your Honor, please, Gray whispered, his voice cracking into a sob. I can't. You don't understand. They took the company. My accounts are frozen. I have literally nothing. Judge Allister leaned over the bench, his eyes cold steel. Then I suggest you do what millions of other New Yorkers do when they face hardship, Mr. Blackwood. Go out there, find a job, and work for it. Case closed. Bam! The sound of the gavel striking the wood was final. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. The walk of shame. 10 minutes later, the double doors of the courthouse swung open. Hera emerged first. The storm that had been brewing all morning had finally broken. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the New York streets into gray rivers. But Hera didn't feel a drop. A team of security guards, Sterling family personnel, immediately raised large black umbrellas over her head. The press was waiting. A sea of cameras flashed blinding white lights cutting through the gloom. Reporters shouted over the thunder. "Hera, is it true you own the company now? Mrs. Sterling, what's your first move as CEO?" Hera looked this way. Hera didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. She wore a small triumphant smile, not of arrogance but of relief. Arthur Sterling walked beside her, his hand gripping her elbow gently. A sleek midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, leaped out to open the door. Hera slid into the warm leather interior, safe, dry, and powerful. The car pulled away, parting the sea of reporters like a ship cutting through waves. 5 minutes passed. The reporters began to pack up, sensing the main event was over. Then Gray emerged. There were no umbrellas, there were no guards, there was no Rolls-Royce. He stepped out onto the granite stairs, and the wind immediately whipped his expensive suit jacket open. The rain soaked him instantly, plastering his thinning hair to his skull. He looked around, bewildered. For the last 10 years, a car had always been waiting for him. A driver had always been there to shield him. He reached into his pocket for his phone, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. He tapped the Uber app. Account suspended, payment method declined. He stared at the screen, blinking rain out of his eyes. He tried his banking app. Access denied. Contact branch administrator. He stood there, water dripping off the end of his nose, shivering violently. A cameraman from a local news station who was packing up his gear spotted him. He didn't raise his camera. He just laughed. "Hey, Blackwood!" the cameraman shouted. "Subway station is 2 blocks that way. Better run, buddy, you're ruining the suit." Gray looked down at his charcoal Armani suit, a garment that cost $5,000. It was ruined. Heavy with water, sagging, pathetic. He took a step down the stairs, his Italian leather loafers slipping on the wet stone. He had to grab the handrail to keep from falling. He looked up at the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan buildings he used to think he owned. Now they just looked like tombstones. He pulled his collar up, put his head down, and began to walk into the gray, freezing rain, invisible and alone. 6 months later. The hard karma. New York City has a short memory. The scandal of Blackwood Dynamics was news for a week. Then it was replaced by the next big thing. The company itself had recovered remarkably. Rebranded as Sterling Tech, it was now the industry leader in ethical software development. Hera Sterling was on the cover of Time magazine. Gray Blackwood, however, had not recovered. The fall had been brutal and total. Without a reference, without a degree, it turned out he had lied about finishing his MBA, and with a Google search result that labeled him a toxic liability, no reputable firm would touch him. He had been evicted from his penthouse 3 days after the trial. He had sold his watch collection to pay for a motel in Queens. When that money ran out, he moved to a studio apartment in the Bronx with no heat. Now he stood outside the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue. It was the night of the annual Sterling Charity Gala, the very same event where 1 year ago he had thrown his wife out. But Gray wasn't a guest. He was wearing a red polyester vest that was too tight across the shoulders. A cheap plastic name tag pinned to his chest read, "Gray, Valet." "Hey, new guy," the valet supervisor, a 20-year-old kid named Kyle, shouted. "Stop daydreaming, we got a rush coming in. VIPs only. Don't scratch anything or it's coming out of your paycheck." "Yes, Kyle. I got it," Gray muttered, keeping his head down. The shame burned in his gut like acid. He used to tip guys like Kyle $100 just for opening a door. Now he took orders from them. A line of luxury cars stretched down the block. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Maybachs. The smell of exhaust mixed with the scent of expensive perfume wafting from the hotel entrance. It was a torture designed specifically for him. "Next car, move it!" Kyle yelled. A long black limousine pulled up to the curb. It was the lead car of the night. The flags on the hood indicated it belonged to the host of the event. Gray froze. He knew who was in that car. "Blackwood, get the door!" Kyle screamed. Gray's legs felt like lead. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide in the alleyway. But he needed this job. He had rent due tomorrow. If he walked away, he would be on the street. He forced himself to move. He walked to the rear passenger door of the limousine. His hand, rough and chapped from the cold, gripped the polished chrome handle. He took a breath, swallowed his pride, and pulled the door open. "Good evening. Welcome to the Pierre." Gray recited the script, staring strictly at the pavement. A pair of shoes stepped out. They were gold, strappy heels encrusted with diamonds. Gray couldn't help it. His eyes traveled up. The gown was liquid gold shimmering under the hotel marquee lights. It flowed around her like armor. Hera stood there more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She wasn't the timid woman in the gray cardigan anymore. She was a queen in her prime. Beside her, a man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a stylish, modern suit, no tie. He had a kind face and warm eyes. He was holding Hera's hand, not gripping it for control, but holding it for connection. Hera paused. She adjusted her clutch. Then she looked at the valet holding her door. Time seemed to stop. The noise of the city, the honking cabs, the chatter of the paparazzi faded into a dull roar. Gray stared at her, his mouth slightly open. His heart hammered against his ribs. He waited for the explosion. He waited for her to laugh at him. He waited for her to point him out to her new boyfriend and say, "Look, that's the loser who threw me away." He waited for the anger. But there was no anger. Hera looked at Gray Blackwood. She looked at his cheap red vest. She looked at his tired, lined face. She looked at his name tag. And her expression didn't change. Her eyes were completely empty of emotion. There was no hate, no love, no pity, no triumph. It was the look you give a stranger on the subway. It was the look you give a piece of furniture. She looked through him. To her, the man holding the door wasn't Gray Blackwood, the ex-husband who broke her heart. He was just the help. He was a non-entity. He was a ghost from a life she had already forgotten. She turned her head away, breaking the contact without a second thought. She looked up at her partner and smiled a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Shall we go inside?" she asked the man. "Grandfather is waiting." "After you," the man said softly. Hera swept past Gray, the train of her gold dress brushing against his cheap polyester trousers. The scent of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, filled his nose, a painful memory of what he once had. She walked up the red carpet, the flashbulbs exploding in a frenzy of adoration. The heavy velvet ropes parted for her. The doorman bowed. She disappeared into the warmth and light of the gala. Gray was left standing on the curb, holding the handle of an empty car. "Hey, buddy, close the door," the limousine driver yelled from the front window. "I gotta move." "You're blocking traffic." Gray snapped out of his trance. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Sorry, sir." He slammed the door shut. The limo pulled away, splashing dirty puddle water onto Gray's shoes. "Blackwood," Kyle shouted from the podium. "Quit standing around. We got a Mercedes pulling up, hustle." Gray wiped a drop of rain from his cheek. He looked at the golden glow of the hotel entrance one last time. He realized then that hate would have been better. If she hated him, it meant he still mattered. But indifference proved that he was truly, utterly gone. He buttoned his cheap red vest, lowered his head, and shuffled toward the next car. "Yes, sir," Gray whispered to the empty air. "Right away, sir." The rain began to fall harder, washing him away into the gray background of the city, just another face in the crowd parking cars for the people who matter. Gray Blackwood learned the hardest lesson of all: when you treat people like trash, don't be surprised when they turn out to be the treasure you can no longer afford. He mistook kindness for weakness and silence for submission, never realizing that the wheel of karma is always turning. He threw his wife out into the rain to save his image, only to wash away his own future in the process. It serves as a brutal reminder to all of us. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder of success, because you'll meet them again on your way down. What do you think? Did Gray deserve his fate, or was the punishment too harsh? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs to see it, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.